So we're going to finish today by talking a little bit about the military perspective and maybe bringing the problem down a couple notches into a more tactical and operational setting. We've heard from lots of great speakers today about some of the issues that are associated with the emerging digital technologies and with the trends that we are seeing in this digital space. What can we do to make sure to protect our forces and critical assets from the problems that arise in this context? That's what this report is about, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm not going to linger too much on the risks because we've already mentioned most of the risks that I think are relevant in this context as well. But I will bring up a case, though, that I think most of us are familiar with, just to highlight how this plays in a military context. So this is a video that comes from the New York Times, where they use the Strava heat map, which is a fitness app that logs geolocation when you're out running or when you're biking. And they could trace these fitness logs to certain weird places in Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq and in other places around the world, which enabled them to very accurately identify military bases and even military bases for special forces. This was all used during the Strava heat map, which you can find online if you just Google for Strava heat map, which makes it very, very easy and accessible to anyone who wishes to know where militaries are out and about in Afghanistan and Syria, because a lot of people in the military are concerned with their health, so they buy these little bracelets to log when they're out running. All these Internet of Things connected devices upload data onto a platform that they have no control over. This data is aggregated, and it's put online, freely available to anyone who wants to know. Some of these places are, of course, known anyway. The bigger air bases, the bigger bases generally are quite well known where they are. But some of these bases that the New York Times were enabled to identify were bases where special operations forces were located, which may or may not have been sensitive. So this is a very well-known example of how digital technologies can cause force protection issues for military personnel. How do you ensure the safety of your assets, your personnel, your information, when so much information about those assets are freely available to anyone online? When Tom talks about the artificial intelligence and the machine learning context, that are tools that are also becoming increasingly accessible for anyone to use. A lot of this stuff can be done just by going onto Facebook or Instagram or any other social platform. Googling, going to the Showdown search engine to search for internet-connected devices, for example. You don't need to be an expert in technology to do these things. It's enough that you have a computer or even a mobile phone. The conclusion that I draw from this, at least, is that digital technologies are changing the operational environment that we're in. For me, there are three things, or actually four things, that are the main concern. One is that geolocation can be very easily obtained with very high accuracy about military units. You can go onto these heat maps, for example, to locate bases. You can just go online to scrape for social media postings that are geotagged. You can use inferential data to infer where military personnel are moving. You can even crowdsource this. Just put up a post saying, I'm interested in this military exercise. Has anyone seen anything? And people will upload pictures, and they will upload and tell you where they saw someone. The same goes for capacities and intentions. You can discern the capacity of a military unit by looking at pictures. What weapons are they carrying? What types of munitions do they have? How many people are in the squad? Where are they moving? In what direction are they heading? These are pieces of intelligence that 20 years ago, you would need a recon squad that was out looking through a pair of binoculars to discern this information. Today, you can just go online and you get everything there for free. The last one, of course, influence. We've touched upon this already. It's very easy to influence someone if you have a lot of information about them. Nora mentioned the Red Team experiment, which was the starting point for this project. It is very, very easy to create smart psychological operations if you have lots of information about your target audience. So after doing the Red Team experiment, which was done 2 years ago, I think, by the StratCom COE, we started to think, okay, so what can be done to protect ourselves against this? Conveniently, there is a framework in military NATO doctrine, which is the force protection framework for how you deal with risks and hazards for a military force. This process that you work through in order to create appropriate measures is, well, it was designed in the 80s originally, so it revolves around physical threats and the threats that were prominent then. And it hasn't really been updated or kept up to speed with what goes on in the digital environment. So we figured, well, A low-hanging fruit for us, perhaps, is to create the framework that can be integrated with the force protection doctrine that we already have, but that will help commanders and decision makers to navigate this complex terrain and to think about these issues in a more productive way. This is the framework we ended up with. And I'm not going to go through every little teeny tiny box on this slide. I'll just go through the big picture things here, and then I'll come to 3 or 4 maybe key takeaways. But this framework essentially provides a way of working through these issues, starting with an assessment of the risk and threat that you see around you, providing the reader with a series of questions that you should ask when you plan for a military operation. These questions, some of them are perhaps already on top of mind for some commanders, but others are maybe quite novel. So for example, when you move into an area of operation, how connected is that area of operation? Militaries tends to want to move around in forests and in forests basically, or whatever the terrain is of the area you're in. In forests, there's a lot of wilderness cameras, for example, trail cameras, all of these devices that are today connected to the internet, right? And you can usually log on to a lot of these things via Showdown. You can just search for them and you can find them, you can log in and you can observe a military unit moving via a trail camera, right? So how many military commanders think about trail cameras when they plan for their operations? Not too many, I suspect. But this is the reality of the contemporary operational space, and these are the issues and the questions that we need to ask ourselves before moving into a specific area. Just as an example. Then there's a set of preventative measures that you could take to kind of inoculate yourself and your soldiers and your forces against these threats. A lot of these preventive measures revolve around educating and communicating and raising awareness about these issues. If you know that someone can weaponize your selfie by locating your unit and discerning your capabilities and target an influence operation against you, you're less prone to take a selfie while you're in the field. But if you don't know that, you're quite prone to take a selfie because you look really cool in your military equipment. So this information needs to reach everyone in the organization and everyone needs to become aware. So we provide a set of tools for doing this. And it should be pointed out that exercising is perhaps the most important thing here, that we can't just talk about this, we need to train this, and we need to incorporate these threats and challenges into our everyday work. We also, of course, need to use the communication capabilities that we have and the different tools we have in our toolbox to deter malicious actors from using these techniques against us and to disrupt the attacks that do happen. And the third box here, the defensive part, of course, is to be able to identify the threats that are relevant to us, work together with other actors to make sure that we're safe, and then also have capacity to actively counter what goes on in this space. Moving on to the promised takeaways. One thing you very often hear on this topic is, well, just remove the phones and problem is solved. That's not really the case. Just removing the phones will solve part of your problem. It may be critical for operational security in certain contexts, but it will not solve all of your problems coming from the digital space. When you remove the phones, you lose insight into what's going on in this environment. You lose a sensor, essentially. If someone decides to hijack your account and impersonate you online and you don't have your phone, you won't be able to detect that. If you're away for a 2-week operation, someone could impersonate you for 2 weeks and achieve some other effect in another arena, which may also be very damaging to you. And also, your digital footprint is not only created here and now. Your digital footprint is created over a long period of time. Removing your phone during a specific point of time doesn't remove your entire digital footprint, right? There's still information about you that can be exploited, that can be useful. If someone is watching you specifically, it may even seem very suspicious that all of a sudden your digital activity just stops. So that's a signifier, right, that something's happening. So it may provide more valuable intelligence to an adversary that you remove the phones than it does that you have the phones with you, but you know how to use them. I think the picture in the background here is quite funny. I also pulled this from the New York Times. So this is a CIA facility where they don't allow mobile phones. But these are the pings of basically everyone working in this facility who leave their phones in their car in the parking lot before going into work. So if you're interested in mapping who works at the CIA, it's not enough to have a no-phone policy in the building because you can map these people anyway. Of course, it helps with what's going on in the building. You can't collect intelligence via the phones here and now about what's going on in there, but you can still map people out, for example. Next conclusion is that red teaming is really important. Our experiment showed that there are weaknesses in our own organizations that we need to deal with. If we don't expose these weaknesses to ourselves, and if we don't send a clear message to our own organizations that this is important, there's no incentive to deal with it. We need to do red teaming to find these weaknesses, and we need to make sure to work with them systematically. We also do this via exercising, of course. There has been a history of military organizations avoiding to include dimensions related to cyber challenges or information challenges or digital challenges generally into their normal exercises because they perceive it to disrupt the exercise as such. If we are out exercising our mechanized infantry battalion, we don't want to include an information operation in there because then we don't get to exercise the actual soldiers firing their rifles against the target, right? That's a very short-term way of looking at the problem. Any type of contemporary conflict will have digital threats that you will have to deal with. If you don't incorporate these into your exercises now, you will not be equipped to deal with them in a real-life operation. And finally, strengthening our ability to identify and counter these threats is really important. And this goes both for identifying and countering malicious attempts from our adversaries, but also identifying and countering the problems that we create for ourselves. So for example, we need to monitor our own troops so that they don't upload weird pictures that show where we are and that they don't go on dates because there seems to be a beautiful woman that really wants to meet them right when they have guard duty. So we need to make sure that we're not giving up the information that we shouldn't be giving up, and no one is trying to obtain that information from us. So, a couple conclusions from this. If we want to have mission success in the future, we need to learn how to navigate this terrain, and we need to limit an adversary space to exploit the risks and possibilities on this arena. There is a lot of low-hanging fruit here. Just training, exercising, the things we already do, if we just add these dimensions into our force detection process, if we add it into our training programs, we will become better and we will minimize the room for maneuver for an adversary. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. We don't need to necessarily hire super advanced cyber forces to deal with this challenge. We need them for other things, but for force protection, it's enough to learn kind of how to protect ourselves. But of course, adopting a framework will not solve all these issues. There are no silver bullets here. What's required is really a culture of digital security within armed forces, which is something we haven't seen yet, but it's perhaps coming in the future. So that's everything that I had. Thank you very much for listening, and do go onto our website to download the reports.